Good evening. I would like to be able to welcome you to the Governance and Policy Committee meeting held tonight on Tuesday, May the 10th. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'd like to open the meeting with our traditional land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is known to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississauga-Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is upon these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Thank you, everyone, for that. I'm just looking to see if there's any declarations of interest tonight. I'm not seeing then. We do have the agenda before us. Is there any additions to that agenda? Donna, you're going to move the acceptance of the agenda. Are there any objections to that? Not seeing any, we will consider the agenda as adopted. We do have the draft minutes of March 24th, 2022. Looking for, are there any errors or omissions before I just ask for a motion, Scott? So you're just one finger ahead of me, Scott. So any amendments, errors or omissions? Not seeing any. Scott, would you move those acceptance and adoption of those minutes of March 24th? Thank you, Scott. Any objections to the adoption of those minutes? I'm not seeing any, so we'll consider those as approved. We have approximately 4 items tonight. There is a policy that is coming forward on the emergency closing of schools policy. If you had not checked your email, Associate Director Markowski also sent out a policy from 2012, which also relates to this one. But it is there for your reference. If you haven't checked your email, it was just sent out prior to the meeting. I believe, Associate Director, you may be, as you said in your email, you might be making reference to it as well. So what you do have included in your package is the policy as it exists, and then there are recommended changes from that policy that Associate Director Markowski is going to, I believe it's going to be you, Jimmy, going to take us through that, the changes. It might be, just wondering, Jillian, if it works for you, Associate Director, if we share that document while you go through it, would that make sense?
Actually, through you, Chair Barrett, I am comfortable with whatever you or the trustees feel is best. I was going to, just to walk you through kind of what the previous document and the new document and sort of highlight the various changes.
Yeah.
And walk you through that.
Okay. The will of the trustees, do you want the document shared or do you have it all in front of you? So looks like people have it in front of them. I know I have it on my second screen, so I'm good. Looks like Darlene's looking at another screen too. So you're with me, Darlene. So we got the 2 screens going. So Jimmy, I think you could just walk us through it and we can follow along on the documents.
All right, thank you. And again, through you, Chair Barrett, I'm going to take a moment to walk you through the updated emergency closing of schools policy and just highlight the changes that have been made. Afterwards, actually, and I'll just mention it now, we do have 2 additional procedures, the emergency closing of schools and the cancellation of student transportation procedures that are being shared with you this evening as well for information. They've been updated. I'll take a moment to walk you through some of the key highlights of those as well. So, and I apologize, I sent the previous version of this policy to you in an email, as Chair Barrett had mentioned. I think sometimes it's easier just to see what the original version looked like without all the track changes, which is why I wanted to share that with you. It was last updated in October of 2012. And you'll notice in the 2012 version that the policy consisted of 3 points only. It states that simply stating that the emergency situations may arise affecting the normal operation of a school, that during such emergency situations, staff are authorized to take necessary actions, And then the third point is that the director will report annually on the use of emergency procedures. So I'm going to flip now in terms of the updated policy, which starts on page 4 of your package. The report is on page 4. I think the policy itself begins on page 6. So our proposed policy, updated in 2022 right now, begins with, it has 2 key sections that I want to take a moment to outline. Section 1.0 is a rationale. It's essentially a value statement. It's affirming the DDSB's commitment to the safety and well-being of all students, staff, families, and community members. Also stating our commitment to ensuring schools and workplaces are open as often as is safely viable to meet the needs of students in the community. The second component of that section is it's a build onto the value statement or rationale. It's our affirmation of our commitment to promoting and upholding Indigenous rights and human rights in all our learning and working environments, and to ensure that all policy documents are in alignment with our human rights policy, the Indigenous education policy, the workplace harassment policy, and the safe and respectful workplace policy. So moving along, after the rationale in section 2, what it really does, section 2.1 is really what the policy itself is predicated upon, and it outlines the section S19(1) of the Education Act, which grants school boards authority with respect to emergency closures when there is a failure of transportation arrangements or inclement weather, fire, flood, the breakdown of the school heating plant, and the failure of an essential utility or a similar emergency. And the remaining components of section 2, there are, in the body of that, there are 4 other key statements, and I'll just highlight them just so you could see how the changes have been made. The Director of Education and delegates have the authority to close a class or schools for a temporary period in accordance with the Education Act. The Board of Trustees will be advised of such decisions as soon as possible after the decision has been made. The Director may adopt procedures to support this policy. And then finally, the Director shall report at least annually or at other times as necessary on all closures under this policy. So Trustee Barrett, that's pretty much it in terms of overriding kind of an overview of some of the changes that have been made that have reflected. What I'll do is, before I get into the procedures, I'll take a bit of a pause. If there's questions from trustees in relation to the policy, I'd happily take them right now.
Okay, thank you. We have a question, Donna.
And I know this particular policy is around the emergency closing of what we can do as under the Education Act. But I'm just wondering if we can say in here, just for other people's minds, that it basically for parents as well, that it doesn't cover any closures due to health or emergency, the Emergencies Measures Act, only because then, they won't be looking for this. And that also covers some of the things that we've been dealing with around closures of schools. And it's just an information item there. I know it's sort of redundant in some way, but just a thought.
Okay, Donna, just to comment on that, you usually don't put in policies about what it doesn't cover. You usually put into policies what it does cover. So, because I'm just big question mark on my forehead about how that might work. So.
I understand that, or maybe it would be a resource saying that other closures under the Health Act or whatever, under resources or something there, just for parents' information, because it is a different process.
Yeah, and is there, so to try and build on that then, Trustee Edwards, Jimmy, is there a specific policy or procedure that would outline those other occupational health and safety guidelines for closing a school that's over and above the Ed Act? Do we have a policy for that, or procedure?
So, and I guess without really, I'm going to lean actually on General Counsel on this one, is that within the procedure itself, Trustee Barrett, we do highlight that when there is a need for an emergency closing due to a public health situation,
yeah,
that there would be consultation with the kind of regional public health unit informing sort of what that would look like.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. In relation to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, there is specific language there that we're bound by as well, that would supersede really any of these policies and procedures, as it is provisions within the act that we're expected to follow. General Counsel, I don't know if you have anything specific. I think one thing I do want to mention, sometimes, and I don't, in a previous conversation we had, if there are situations where it is deemed unsafe, so whether it's right now, for example, I know we've had many questions from the public in relation to what's the threshold that a school may be required to close if there is insufficient supervision in a school. So we would see that this policy, if there is supervision needs that are posing safety concerns in a school, that it does confirm that the director does have the authority to close a classroom or a school based on what would be deemed an emergency situation posing safety to students and staff.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers. I'm trying to.
Yeah, if I can maybe jump in, Chair Barrett as well, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Just to supplement that a little bit. So I think in terms of Trustee Edwards' point, so in terms of an outbreak, we would, in that case, we would obviously defer to the to DRHD, and they have the authority to close schools for an outbreak. But as Associate Director Markowski noted, there could be situations where we have high absentee of staff, whether it's for outbreak or other reason, that may constitute a similar emergency within the meaning of Section 19(1), which would trigger this. And I think we've dealt with this section before in a couple capacities. One, when we had the CUPE strike, we had a potential for EA shortage, so we relied on Section 19(1) as well, and the board passed a resolution authorizing the director to close if there was insufficient supervision in the school. And we also dealt with that same supervision question on a basis of a resolution that the board passed authorizing the director to close school if there was a staff shortage due to the pandemic. I think that particular resolution was limited for the duration of the pandemic. So this policy would, apply going forward, even post pandemic, and would be engaged if there was a staff shortage.
Except the only thing I might add to that is that in section 2.1, it's pretty clear on what the parameters are of being able to emergency closing of schools, and it's limited because of transportation, inclement weather. So isn't this more specific, Patrick? Doesn't this policy limit? Because, or it just doesn't cover those other
well, I mean,
right?
we would say, and this, I mean, we might as well talk it through, but it's the board's policy. It's the board's policy to interpret. But we've sort of taken the position before when we've dealt with this, that similar emergency is something really affecting the safe operations of school. And that could include, we would, I would submit for your consideration that could include inadequate supervision levels. So you could say that's basically a similar emergency. We can't have kids safely in the school because of the inadequacy of either the physical plant, as you say, the Chair Barrett, or the weather doesn't make it safe, the building facility, the boiler, whatever that may be, or there may be inadequate supervision levels. Like just, obviously we're not talking 2 or 3 absences. We're talking
right
about a situation where, there's just not enough teachers or staff in the school to maintain a safe environment.
And that would.
So I guess the question is, I think, what is similar emergency? I guess Chair Barrett is the question.
Yeah. So would those type of elements be included under Section 19(1) of the Education Act?
In my submission, Chair Barrett, they would.
Because it's broad enough.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go back, Donna, for a supplementary, and then to Christine.
Yeah, I was just because my other concern is that we're talking about health, but as I said, there is the Emergency Planning Act where schools are closed. I'm just thinking of a nuclear plant or whatever, it comes under it, like it would be under the regional emergency plan that was part of that, but it would be a health and safety where something happens. So I was just making sure that somewhere it's covered in whatever policy, that's all.
Okay. All right, Christine Thatcher.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Barrett, I did actually read in there that the health department would get involved. I read it somewhere in that the package.
Further in the policy.
Further in the policy. But my question was around actually what came up just after I put my hand up, around the any other, and I guess Donna was addressing some of those issues as well, any other reason for school closure. And I was specifically concerned about the supervision and the effect and the safety of our students. And I just wanted to confirm, I did listen carefully to what you said, Councillor Cotter, but would that be section 2.2 then, where it speaks to the section 19.1 of the Education Act? Is that what that is?
That would be correct. Through you, Chair Barrett, that would be correct, Trustee Thatcher.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I know that Jimmy talks about the element of director shall report at least annually, but we do have other processes in place. For example, the issues communication that may also supersede this as well, in the sense that if there was a closure of a school, we have had a process by which, you know, the local superintendent advises the local trustees. So although I see you're building in the policy an annual, at least an annual, the reality is that we're getting notified, trustees are getting notified when there's an issue in the local schools by the local superintendent. So, okay.
Barrett, that is reflected in 2.3, which is why we want to expand on some of that language there, where it says that the Board of Trustees shall be advised of any decision to close as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I was just building on your point, Jimmy. So just saying that we do have a process in place already.
Yes.
That is working, I would suggest, effectively in being able to notify trustees. So we are aligned, Associate Director. So if you want to continue forward, that'd be terrific.
So if there's no further questions, I'm going to flip to page 12 now. Sorry, I'm just scrolling down here.
Yeah, that's okay.
In your package, you'll notice on page 12, you'll see the emergency closing of schools procedure.
Yeah.
Just generally speaking, I'm just going to highlight some of the changes that have been made from the previous procedure. You'll notice that it embeds the importance of student safety in section 2.0, which specifies the emphasis on the importance of safety measures being put in place. Just an example there, schools receiving students in the morning, even when schools are officially closed. So that entire section really emphasizes those key safety measures and protocols. There are layered protocols within here. You'll notice in section 3.0, there's an emergency closing of schools due to public health situation, which touched a bit, kind of elaborates further on Trustee Edwards' comment previously in relation to contact with our local health unit. And then finally, there's an emergency closing of childcare depots and community hubs in section 4.0. Moving along, actually, this is a key point that I do want to bring attention to. In section 5.0 and 6.0, so in the event of an emergency closing, classroom instruction at secondary schools will pivot instruction to online learning for the day as may be appropriate to do so. So you'll notice that that is captured within 5.0, and I think some of the work that's been done over the last 2 years and how we've been able to respond when schools are closed is reflected in what I would identify as kind of new realities moving forward. In a similar fashion, in section 6.0, it speaks to what that would look like in elementary schools. You'll note that staff will continue with their professional duties, including but not limited to planning, assessment, online instruction, and communication with families. And staff will provide students with virtual learning opportunities as appropriate to the class or grade level. So that's all reflected in 5.0 and 6.0. And then the last piece here, Trustee Barrett, I wanted to highlight was in section 9.0. Our previous procedure was quite verbose in relation to listing all these various radio stations and where parents can access information. We've really tried to update this to speak to just what we would say are common communication channels that families and members of the community can be accessing, switching from, again, that reliance on radio announcements in favor of school and board websites, in addition to school messenger. That's all reflected in there in the new language. I'm going to stop there. That's pretty much the gist of it in terms of the various updates that have been made. And again, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions, trustees? I have a couple. While waiting for anyone else to put their hand up, Jimmy, just the pivoting to online. I mean, I can remember one of our student trustees about 4 years ago saying, aha, I'll never see another snow day again. I think that that was his commentary. I believe he was from the North Carolina. So
I know exactly who you're talking about.
yes, I know. So without mentioning any names. So so I would suggest, just it's a question. Within the framework of our collective agreement and our working relationship with our bargaining units, the ability to be able to pivot is not a concern. Just want to make sure that that we're aligned with the pivoting.
So thank you. And again, through you, Chair, with the experiences that we've had, there's nothing that I could really reference in a collective agreement that would limit our ability to shift learning platforms to a virtual platform if there's a need. And again, obviously, this is under the need of an emergency closing of schools. We've actually been very actively working with our union partners, Trustee Barrett, to support some of these conversations. And as much as I could sit here and say that, you know, it's been very collaborative, when concerns have been raised, we've worked through them. There really is, in particular in secondary schools where our students do have Chromebooks, there's been a culture built in terms of understanding kind of how that shift goes back and forth, especially with the experiences of the last 2 years.
Okay.
I don't see anything in collective agreement language that I could reference right now that would pose any concerns.
Okay, thank you for that. I just thought I'd ask the question. Under section 10.1, where we actually talk about the coordinating transportation services, we've got our CAO listed. We've got her cell phone number listed. I'm just a bit unusual in the sense of putting somebody's specific name and cell phone number in the policy. Is that what we want, so that the understanding of this policy would be public? Do we want to give out the cell phone number of our CAO, or do we want them to contact the actual the office itself? Like, I understand the decision will be made coordinated by, that might be just maybe not putting Kelly's name in there, maybe coordinated by the CAO of Durham District, and then Durham Student Transportation Services, and then maybe an office number. I'm open to the dialogue, but I know that if I was running that organization, I might not want my cell phone out there to have 3,000 parents calling me when we have an emergency closure. So just trying to be sensitive about that process.
Actually, Trustee Barrett, I'm glad you're bringing that up. I think that's a fair point and a great recommendation. What I'll do is I'll make note there in terms of more general language in relation to a contact or a subsequent contact if the primary contact is not available, and then a general office number.
And that way we don't have to change the policy if when Kelly retires in 24 years or something. So, yeah. So, okay. That was the only 2 questions that I had. Any other questions or commentary, trustees? Okay, not seeing any, Jimmy.
I think
Donna snuck in at the last. She's got to get in there to be able to have a comment. Go ahead, Donna.
I understand that we don't want to list all the media and whatever and stations and all that. However, it's really interesting because I don't know how many people don't know which radio station to listen to, even if they have a radio. And then if they watch a news station, it might not be the local news station, and they don't even know what the local news station is. And it's really the local that has the more up-to-date information, because you wait for, Toronto to put it up. It's sometimes forever. So I'm just questioning whether we do actually list the stations, because, as I said, I don't think anybody here knows who the local stations are. Like, when it comes to it's not, it's not prominent. And so I'm a little concerned about not listing them.
And Donna, I'm sorry, and Trustee Edwards, I apologize. I'm open to the feedback. I think the thinking here was, when you look at how we communicate with families now, oftentimes in a situation like this, we would likely send a mass school messenger out to all of our families, informing them that schools are closed and whatever necessary steps would be taken, whether we're pivoting instruction to online, etc. The previous procedure that was in place, again, I'm going to say, in terms of where we were in 2012 or previous to that, and I realize the policy itself was started back in 1977, how it is that individuals are accessing information has really shifted and changed. And I think what we were trying to do is reflect that here. I'm open, if there's, overwhelming support from trustees, to list local radio stations. It's just not something that we really do in practice. And I'd happily connect with our communications department on that point.
And I understand that, but I mean, if anything, a parent might I just have too many comments about wrote phone calls sent out that people not necessarily pick them up or won't be available to pick them up. And then as far as that's concerned, and then I know I would check the website, but how fast would the school's website be updated? Do they have internet connection? I just feel that at this point in time, we're still not quite ready to get rid of the radio stations. Agree that our mode has changed, but I'm not 100% sure that.
Thank you, Donna. We got your point. Thank you. So, Darlene, you had your hand up, I think.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. We're kind of at this pivot point, right? And people are shifting away from traditional forms of media for information more and more. I guess I just wonder, I think parents would more likely turn to, to their local resources rather than referring to this procedure. I think this informs more, what we as a board are going to do. But I understand, the comment that, it's when you're parenting and you're looking for all the forms of information, it could be helpful, but I don't know if it's strictly necessary.
Thank you, Darlene. And Robert, you had your hand up for comment.
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair Barrett. In the cancellation of student transportation procedure, so when buses are typically canceled, that process would remain in terms of DSTS sending that notification to both local media. It also goes to regional media. So when you see on CP24, sometimes when there's snow days or major snow events, that communication is on there. Just further to Associate Director Markowski's point, what we do find typically when there is these very rare situations is we do aim to directly communicate with families always first and foremost. And what we found is sometimes local media does pick that up as well through different ways, but that's something for us to definitely consider in terms of those situations where, a very rare situation if there is a massive power outage, for example.
Okay, just just further commentary from myself on that. I mean, I get Trustee Edwards' point, but I'm quite surprised with the commentary, Trustee Edwards, about that people don't know what local media is, because the reality is, in my households that have kids, all of my, I haven't heard an issue about people not knowing where to look for on CP24 or local radio stations. So the only thing I would have concern about including in the policy is that therefore it has to always be up to date. It becomes a definitive source. And I think we have to stop being able to, have a policy that's going to be required to make sure it's updated. So the commentary that they can check local media might be enough just to be able to suffice. But I think spoon feeding isn't necessary either. So, but anyway. Yeah, I know that went over like a lead balloon with you, Donna. So, but so okay, we heard from that kind of like it's not seeing any consensus, so great rushing to the walls of justice to change that. So Jimmy, further commentary on policy, or that was on that one?
No, I will note
Yeah.
what has been shared.
Yeah.
And if there isn't any other questions, I can move on to the cancellation of student transportation procedure. Trustee Barrett.
Yes, please do that, sir. And that starts on, just getting to it, page 15, I believe. Yeah.
So that's correct. It begins, the updated procedure is on page 15, cancellation of student transportation. And again, I'm just going to highlight the changes. One of the big pieces actually is right at the beginning. It embeds all of the information from the previous document, but it includes an explanation of our busing transportation zones. So weather patterns obviously vary greatly across the Durham region, and we are aware of that. So our busing transportation zones are ensuring that we maximize the number of schools we can keep open during inclement weather by canceling only those routes experiencing inclement conditions. So it's worth noting there, zones 1, 2, 3, and 4, our 3 northern townships each have their own zone, 1, 2, and 3, and then the 401 corridor, if I should call it, from Pickering to Oshawa is captured within zone 4. We've been utilizing these busing zones for quite some time, but they haven't been reflected in our policies and procedures. So this updated procedure reflects that. And again, noting here as well, similar to the previous procedure, in the event that schools are closed due to inclement weather, you'll notice that classroom instruction at secondary schools will pivot instruction to online learning for the day as may be appropriate to do so. And that similarly is outlined for elementary schools. Again, the same language there. Staff will continue with their professional duties, including but not limited to planning, assessment, online instruction, and communication with families. Staff will provide students with virtual opportunities as appropriate to the class grade level. I do want to highlight, Trustee Barrett, we had quite a bit of conversation around this. So it's one thing when transportation is interrupted or has been canceled, but schools remain open versus schools are outright closed and what would happen. So when you look at the procedure, under 1.5.1.4, it says here that the CAO of DSTS will contact all designated radio stations to advise and will post on both the boards and DSTS website and voice message system the appropriate message which will be one of the following. So transportation services have been canceled for the following bus transportation zones, but schools remain open, or that some or all the schools in the following transportation zone are closed for the day and parents are requested to keep their children at home. So I just want to make sure that we're delineating here that between schools actually closing versus cancellation of transportation, but schools are remaining open, and that's captured in there. And then that reference to the pivoting of instruction is specific to the closure of schools, which is captured in section 1.5.3. 1.5.3.2 there speaks to both the secondary and elementary requirements there in terms of what that looks like. And it aligns directly to the procedure for emergency closing of schools If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. I think the question here that may come up, and I guess I will bring it forward. So during the pandemic, we did have an addendum to our current procedure where we were shifting instruction during snow days for certain zones to online. What this procedure is basically saying is that schools will remain open. We're not shifting instruction to online learning. Schools will remain open both for elementary and secondary. The only time we're actually shifting to online learning if the schools are outright closed, which is what we would have experienced, if you'll recall, in mid-January. Some of the thinking around that was in particular the impact to special education classrooms and how it is that that may be impacting their ability to do that. We did have some conversations around that, and I don't know if there's input from trustees. Happily to take that and bring that back to the table if there's a need to do so. But I wanted to make sure that we were clear in terms of what that reflects. So it is under strictly when schools are closed that we would be shifting instruction to online, as if the cancellation of transportation, schools remain open and it would be business as usual, but parents would obviously just bring their students, their children to school if they have the ability to do so.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Jimmy. And we'll go with Christine and then Carolyn.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Barrett. I was just looking for a little clarification around section 1.5.3.2. So we've got the schools closed, but are the staff still at the school? Is that the way it works? Schools are closed and students are not to come to school, but teachers are at school? Am I reading that correctly?
So in situation, thank you, and again through you, Chair, Trustee Thatcher, when schools are closed, there's an announcement that basically all of our services and teachers would remain at home. But if you go up into the procedure, under, give me a second here. There's a section that actually directly speaks to this, where the school will have a contingency, like an emergency response team of teachers that would show up. If students do arrive in the morning, that support team will greet the students. They'll make sure we contact parents. They'll wait until all students return home safely, and at which point they would go home. But not all educators would be expected to report to school. It would be just strictly that emergency team, Trustee Thatcher.
Okay, thank you. So this would be a situation where staff were at home, but some staff were expected to come to school, because in the case of schools closed, oftentimes we do have some kids who haven't heard the announcements and they come to school. But I understand that. I'm just wondering then about in terms of the collective agreement. Is this built into the supervision schedule here, or am I not reading that correctly? Just wondering. I'm just wondering about the supervision here.
So in a situation like this, Trustee Thatcher, we would be deeming this an emergency, where the principal would actually have, again, a small group of school staff that would be receiving students. The school itself would not be following any standard supervision schedule because schools are technically closed that day. It's more of an emergency plan that's in place to ensure that if students do show up because they haven't, parents or families or children have not accessed information that's informed them that schools are closed for the day, that we would have a team available to ensure that students are safe while we contact families and have them picked up. I don't see this as having any intersection with school supervision schedules or any collective agreement, because we're really functioning at this point under an emergency situation.
Yeah, I got that. It's just that schools do have a specific number of minutes of supervision time for staff, and I just wondered if that could be something that might be seen as additional supervision for this group of people. But you're saying that this is an emergency situation and a safety concern. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher. Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Barrett. A couple of things that I'm greatly appreciating. 1.5.4. So if our students are in class and the weather deteriorates and we determine that we need to send our students home and we call in the buses early, I'm glad that that decision is made by 11 a.m. That's important because we do need to connect with all of our parents. Under 1.5.6, I also really appreciate the fact that our principals or a designate would stay in the school until that principal has been notified that all of the buses have dropped off all of our students and they have arrived home safely. So those 2 points, I'm glad that we've included them. Under 1.5.4, I'm thinking that department is probably meant to be departure.
Yes.
Early departure. But
Thank you, and I will make note of that. I appreciate that.
thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn, for sharing that. It's a school teacher in you for catching that. Trustee Crawford.
Thank you. Jimmy, I heard you mention that you could switch to virtual learning during this closure period. I assume that's something that we've had experience with the last couple of years. So is that the way that it's set up? Is that easy? Not easy, but it can be done so that they're advised the schools are closed at the same time they're advised that they can learn virtually.
Thank you.
And is that easily done?
You know, Trustee Crawford and I would, based on our recent experiences, for students from grade 7 to 12, majority of our classrooms, I would, probably go as far as saying all of our classrooms, because students are utilizing Chromebooks, there's a natural kind of physical and learning and virtual learning environment that's been created throughout the year. So I would say for grades 7 to 12, it does occur quite naturally in terms of having that virtual platform that the teacher and the students have already pre-established what I would say a learning relationship. With K to 6, it does look a bit different. And I think we've realized and sort of worked through some of those challenges. Oftentimes even accessing technology for students may pose challenges, which is why we wanted to leave it flexible within the explanation. You'll note it says here in elementary, professional duties are included but not limited to planning, assessment, online instruction, and communication. So depending on how long the closure is, we will need to assess what would be realistic in terms of K to 6 students shifting to a virtual learning platform or not, for that matter. And it's hard to really gauge that without understanding the circumstances and the variables that we're dealing with. I think what we've done here is we've left the language open enough that it provides us an opportunity to take the necessary steps that we deem as necessary, at the same time understanding the challenges that exist, which I believe you're referencing. I hope that kind of provides a bit of an explanation. I think it's fair to say that with our intermediate and senior students, it's quite easy just based on their learning styles and the access of technology. And that looks and feels a bit different with our primary and junior students.
I guess I'm thinking emergency closings are not going to last for very long. And I just wondered if, because of our experience, the technology is there to learn virtually. And going back to a previous question about informing people, this may be something that everybody already knows, but most students have cell phones. They can hit the cell phone and check the weather and anything. Are we connecting with those cell phones also?
Again, and thank you through you, Chair. I think it's fair to say, Trustee Crawford, that we do have students that do access their phones as a learning tool for a variety of actually functions. I I would say that usually it's not conducive just because of the size of a phone and the screen sometimes for you to be getting that full experience. Although I'm sure some of our students would challenge me on that thinking. What I will share though, again, I want to mention, go back sort of even when we talk about phones, normally that's very common with our students from grade 7 to 12 versus our primary and junior students, which again creates that kind of inequity of access just based on age and the resources that are available to them.
Well, I was really referring to an earlier question about whether the children should know or the students should know whether the school is open or not. And so, and we talked about radio stations and phone and the site and everything, but something they all have and could quickly look at is their cell phone. So is that information sent out on an app that would show up on their cell phone, we're closed today, and maybe some additional information?
Yeah, sorry, and my apology, Trustee Crawford.
That's okay, I wasn't clear.
Yeah, so many, I would say most individuals have an email app on their phones. So school messenger and any school emails would go directly to their phones and they would easily access that information, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it'd be something that could be very difficult if you're going to create a list of emails. I mean, if you think about how many students we have and how many families and keeping that up to date, it'd be more of a pull instead of a push from that standpoint.
I wasn't thinking of emails, Chair. I'm thinking of just as we get information on weather and as we get information on our site, if they had an app on their phone, they could look and get the information there. It doesn't have to come through an email. It can be on the screen.
Yeah, well, there's news apps, there's all sorts of apps. So the kids are much further ahead than we are, Paul, that's for sure. So Christine, is your question with regards to this? If
Yes.
not, okay, because if it's with regards to this, we'll go ahead, because I think Robert wanted to add to the email push, but go ahead, Christine.
Go ahead to Robert then, because
Okay.
mine's a little bit different.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Thatcher. Go ahead, Robert.
Thanks through you, Chair Barrett. Over the last couple of years, we've now gained the functionality for students to have email accounts that would be used, that are used for internal use, that they can collaborate with one another. So what we're doing and pursuing right now is how do we integrate those emails, student emails, as part of the school messenger that do go out to, that are primarily the parents and guardians, as just another feature, another way in order to contact students who are primarily in secondary, but also in grades 7 and 8 with that type of information. So as time goes on, that's something that some of them would be getting pushed to their devices as well, as opposed to, finding out on social media or through their teacher or through their parents.
Okay, thanks for that, Robert. And we'll go now to you, Trustee Thatcher.
Just two things, Chair Barrett, just to a comment around Trustee Crawford's comment. It is in this day and age, we would expect that with all of the methods of communication that all kids should be reached in terms of the school closures. But it has been my experience that there are always a few stragglers that come in anyway, and I guess that's probably the reason that we covered it off. Anyway, the other thing is just something quick here. Section 3.1. A little editing. I think if I'm not mistaken, it should be specific directions there, not director. Would you think?
You are absolutely right, Trustee Thatcher. Thank you again. My
Just
apologies.
a small thing. Okay, thanks.
Well, it looks like we've got our editor of the school teachers on target today. So thank you, Christine. Any further commentary, Jimmy, to this this policy, or you've touched the elements that you were looking to touch?
No, I think that summarizes it, Trustee Barrett, and you'll see the last piece there. There's an appendice with the zone maps.
Yes.
That's also been added.
Yeah. So trustees, knowing that we have kind of gone through these policies and they're probably a lot less controversial than some of the policies that we've dealt with at this committee, I am looking for a motion to be able to have the governance committee recommend that these two policies go forward to the board meeting for notice of motion to be able to be good May, and then they come to the June if I get my dates right. So as long as people are nodding, then it's all good. So, okay, so I am looking for someone to be able to make that motion, to be able to recommend. And I see Trustee Morton, you've got your hand up. So we'll make the motion. Are there any commentary, comments, other errors or omissions, et cetera, with regards to taking these policies forward? Is any other further questions? Don't see anything. Are there any? So I'm going to call the motion. Are there any objections to taking these two policies forward to the next board meeting in May for notice of motion for passage in June, potentially, depending upon the board? Don't see anybody opposed to that. So we will bring these two policies forward for in May. Okay, the next item on the agenda is with regards to communication. I'm just going to go back to my agenda to get the exact wording of the item on the agenda. Let me just see here, get to the minutes. There we go. Oh, come on, Mike, where is my agenda? Bear with me, bear with me. There it is. Receiving board correspondence and letters. So I know that this had come up, so I just wanted to be able to have some conversation with regards to it. That what is the process when a board receives correspondence from the public, and how is that dealt with, and how is that correspondence then distributed to trustees? I was concerned about a number of items that had come forward, or some items that did not come forward, and I'm thinking that we need to at least be able to have a conversation that we can put a framework or boundarize the conversation or the process by which how letters are shared. So I wasn't looking at a very complicated process. I really saw that, to me, there was 4 pieces to this potential element. One is that any correspondence that is directed to the chair of the board, and we're talking about the chair, we're not talking about letters or emails that we may get as individuals. We're talking about correspondence that is directed to the chair of the board, that in reality, if it is directed to the chair as chair of the board, so Carolyn, I'm not talking about you as a trustee for the North, where you may have emails that are related directly about constituents issues, specifically with regards to role, that any of the correspondence that is directed to the chair does become property of the board, and therefore should be distributed to the entire board through a process. I think probably 90% of the time we're following this process, but sometimes I have noticed that there's been a little bit of just a gap in the process. So my first point was that anything directed to the chair should come to all trustees, and it should come in correspondence. And it would be at the discretion of the board chair that if it's urgent, that it would get, and we've seen this in previous situations, that if it is urgent, that it would be sent out. It could be sent out to all of the trustees, but it would still be included in the next board package as well. There are some, however, so that to me with 3 things. 1, anything directed to the chair is public. 2 is it should be shared with all trustees, and there would be discretion at the behalf of the chair to be able to determine whether it gets set out in advance. Some is just for information, so it could just appear in a package. And the last piece I was going to suggest is that I think there does have to be some filtering around the letters. I think that if there are letters that are disparaging to any individual, or disparaging of our principles and moral compass of the elements that we stand for as a board, or if there's anything that is disparaging to any group of individuals, that it should not be distributed, because it would not meet our requirements and would therefore not advance the goals of public education. And I would suggest that that the chair would inform us verbally, perhaps at a meeting and in camera, but that the letter should not be distributed if it breaks those policies or those directions. I think that there was one letter that was received that I think that would not have been distributed otherwise, because it was disparaging of individual trustees. I have also been the recipient of a number of letters that have come when I was chair, criticizing myself. I don't believe they should have been distributed, but I think that we need to set some direction so that any chair would then follow the process. So I'm just opening this up for conversation, and then we can have a conversation about it and then maybe formalize it a little bit as well. So I have a speakers list. I'll start with Trustee Crawford and then Trustee Forbes.
Okay, you may have said it all, and you're right, it's probably a small percentage, but we should watch carefully about that. And my concern is that any letter could come through that's marked confidential, and what you do with it. And now we're in a process where there may be more of those letters. So if your suggestion is, if it's not already a policy, that when a letter like that is received by the chair, or maybe anyone, I mean, they could send a letter like that to anyone, then it should be taken up with the board so that the full board knows about it. And that would have to be done, I'm thinking, at the next committee of the whole in camera. Is that what you're suggesting, Chair?
Almost, Trustee Crawford. I think that if, let's use an example, hypothetical example, if there was a letter sent to you, Trustee Crawford, that was making a commentary about the board or other trustees or whatever, I believe that would stay with you, would not be made public. I'm only talking about letters that are absolutely directed to the chair as the functioning head of the board. The chair has no authority and represents us all. And again, setting aside that if it was to Carolyn Morton, trustee of Scugog, Brock and Uxbridge, but so we're almost there, Trustee Crawford. I was not suggesting that if I received a letter that somehow it makes it onto the docket and gets distributed to everybody. That was one letter to one trustee. I think when it comes to the chair, it goes to all trustees. That was my thought process anyway, so.
Well, just supplemental to what I was saying.
Yeah.
I said that the same type of letter, the exact same letter, could have been addressed to an individual trustee, but it's the content that we have to be concerned with, and we'd have to make a judgment at that time that this is really a board issue and it needs to be given to the board for a decision, but it has to be done in a way that is purely confidential, except for the meeting that would take place. Now, I'm just wondering, do we have a policy now, and does this require a change to that policy or an update to the wording?
As far as I know, there is no direct procedure that talks about how board correspondence is shared. Hence why I was bringing it forward, Trustee Crawford, for discussion.
No, I appreciate you bringing it forward, and we certainly should do something with it, even if it is infrequent. Thank you.
Yeah, it certainly is infrequent. So I'll go to Trustee Forbes next.
Thank you, Chair Barrett. So just for my clarification, when we're talking about derogatory, we're talking about concerns regarding conduct or language, or are we just talking about, I guess if it's frivolous and vexatious, we would, that would require a different response, unless it's based specifics on in terms of behavior in public board meetings or whatnot, or committee meetings. I don't know. I just want to understand, is that what we're talking about? Because I think we do kind of have a process of, well, not necessarily a process, but there's clear procedures on how the public can make complaints, and sending an email, I just want to clarify that.
Well, I guess I would see it writing that there's no place in governance for an individual to come forward making a specific commentary with regards about the actions or conduct of a singular trustee. If there is concerns, then it goes to the chair. Then I think the chair has a responsibility to be able to, similar to a broader conversation we've had in the past, is to be able to direct that individual that there are methodologies by which that can be dealt with and can be pointed to, whether it's a code of conduct, etc. But I don't think there's any place at any board meeting that an individual trustee or a group of trustees are called out and mentioned by name. If it's got talked about a broader perspective, then that would be the case, you know, then it could be dealt with in that context. And but if it's about a singular trustee, then I would suggest there's still processes. Oh, you flipped. Okay, we moved again. So now you're over here. So that there's still a process being able to do that, and the chair would have the responsibility to be able to point out to the individual where that where the individual could potentially take that complaint, or how it could be dealt with. For example, if it was a complaint about the whole board, like for example, we don't like your decision on French immersion, for example, doesn't mention anyone by name, but is disappointed in us, then I think that's the public letter that gets included in correspondence. Canadian Parents of French, for example, writes a letter and has concerns about what we're doing, or any other group, but as long as it doesn't mention individuals by name or is it disparaging in nature. And I think you are right. I think, you know, vexatious, etc., would be other elements that we would have to have some discretion upon as well. It would be no different if they were disparaging staff as well. It just it has no place. So
yeah, I absolutely agree. So thanks for the clarification. I would agree that you know, we have clear policy, like procedures for the public and anyone to make a complaint if they have one. I would, you know, and I think we've had this discussion previously, pointing them to that, but not necessarily sharing it with the board. You know, if it hasn't followed that complaints process. You're on mute.
Trustee Thatcher and then Trustee Crawford.
Thanks very much, and through you, Chair Barrett. I just had a question, and certainly hopeful that none of us have ever received a threat of any kind via email. But should that be the case, would that be something that might be treated a little differently?
And again, I'm going to be quite honest, I'm making this up as I go along, just based upon some of my other experience in other boards. To address that specifically, if there was a threat specifically to a trustee, then I think it should be elevated to the board and then to council, and it should be dealt with within that that manner. If it indeed is a threat of you know, ill harm or anything of that nature, I would, well, you flipped again. Okay, there you are. I would agree with you, Trustee Thatcher. There would still be a process, and a trustee could bring that forward to the chair and the vice chair, and then have it work through the process internally as well. If indeed it was an ugly, you know, threat.
Yes,
So,
thank you.
Trustee Crawford.
Yes, this sort of is blending into another subject on the agenda tonight, the one that I was interested in. It's quite different from what we're talking about here, of the chair receiving something disparaging and then the policy is to share it with the board, as opposed to saying to people there's a process to go through. And maybe you can remind me to address this on my item, because it could be sometimes that process would allow things to go through that maybe we don't want them to. So I'll take that up later, but it is related to this.
Yeah, but I can see where there's some overlap. Certainly the conversation started with regards to how do we handle correspondence. And then it's certainly drifted into the commentary with regards to that any methodology on dealing with correspondence should not preclude the right of somebody in the public to be able to voice a concern, but that letter or that element doesn't necessarily have to come to the whole board. I'm not looking to be able to have disparaging letters circulated. I believe that the chair, and in the absence, the vice chair, would deal with that as a process on being able to let the individual know where. But I mean, I have sat around this board that, like you, Paul, a long time, and you know, there have been letters that have been sent to the entire board that were disparaging and should not have been entertained. And I think that should be a process by which that there's other elements or other venues to be able to deal with those instead of dealing with those in a public matter, but not, to Darlene's point, not taking away the right of an individual, I'm talking non-trustee, non-staff member, to be able to have concerns addressed, and the chair should direct that. So I think that's an important point to remember. And so I think I've just tried to capture as I talk out loud. So.
Is a key element to that letter the fact that it names a person as opposed to disking us all? I mean, I can see the difference in it. So the important part would be a person is actually named here.
Correct. That's what I would see, Trustee Crawford. Yes. If they're disappointed in the decision that the board has made, as we have received, for example, many letters with regards to mask or not to mask, you know, that is one thing. But there's another one that mentioned specific, let's say, that I didn't like that this trustee voted in this manner. I believe that that's inappropriate to be able to share that. So what I'm suggesting is, and I know I've put a lot of broad piece, but I would be more than willing to work with, whether it's Patrick and Robert, or Robert and Patrick, or Robert, Patrick, Jimmy, or Jimmy, Patrick, or Robert, on being able to at least kind of put a draft together that we could consider as a policy. But I was just kind of introducing it in order to be able to have some discussion with regards to that. And I see Don Edwards got right in there at the end again. So go ahead, Donna, and then Carolyn. Go ahead, Donna.
When we're talking about, is it a policy or a procedure that we're actually looking at? Because to me, it would be more of a procedure that when the chair.
I agree, it's the procedure.
So draft of procedure.
Yeah, it would be. It was just a slip of the tongue. Thank you, Donna, for keeping me honest. Carolyn?
I was just going to say, I think that's a great idea that you volunteer, Chair Barrett, to work with Rob Surjanic and work with our council, work with our associate directors. I think it's a good idea to have that procedure in writing. That would be an advantage. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to Patrick, and then Scott, and then back to Paul.
Thanks, and through you, Chair Barrett. So happy to assist if that's the will of the committee. I just wanted to, I think, flag in terms of what we call this document. My suggestion would be that it not be a policy or a procedure. I think it's probably one of two things. It'd be a protocol for the chair, or we amend the bylaw and put it in the bylaw. I think it'd be one of those things. I don't think it's a procedure, because that's really governing staff and how staff implements a policy. So I think it's really an internal matter of board governance. So it either go in the bylaw, or we could, develop a protocol for chair communication that would sit outside the bylaws. So those would be my two suggested options.
Okay, and certainly thank you for that, Patrick. I mean, personally, I don't have any objections to any where it fits. I don't, and I certainly take your counsel, if you excuse the pun, take your counsel in order to be able to where that best fits. It's either a procedure, protocol, or policy, or bylaws. So 3 P's and a B. So, okay, but So as we work on this, we can maybe even make a recommendation at that point where it fits best. I'm going to go to you next, Trustee Templeton.
Actually, Patrick nailed it on the head there with the policy procedure. I do like the protocol. It kind of works in with the chair. And I'd also wouldn't mind if we had another trustee sitting on it, if you're okay with that. I wouldn't mind sitting on and we can hammer things out. I like it that way.
I mean, what we can do is we can certainly work on creating a draft together, Scott, for sure. No issue there. As long as you don't bring pictures of your grandchild, that's okay.
I might.
Okay, Trustee Crawford, back to you, sir.
No, I'm all for any group, no matter how large or small, bringing us a draft of wording, because as soon as we have that, we can get to work on it. And of course, you can even feed it to us as we've done before to say, what do you think of this? Because it means everybody's involved. After we do it, then we can decide whether or not it should go into the bylaws.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it would all come back to this committee as well and be circulated similar to the process that we've used prior to this too. So if there's no further comments, because I did want to be able to get to your item on the agenda as well, Paul, with regards to I just want to make sure I get the wording right to, sorry, I'm just using my iPad over here, about trustee self-assessment. Trustee Crawford, if you wanted to be able to introduce this in your email, you talked about a presentation. I don't know if it was just going to be something verbal with regards to your ideas that you had kind of laid out, but I'll leave it to you, Trustee Crawford.
All right, it's actually the other item that I'm most interested in. This came up as part of a discussion when we were talking about the director's preview, and that whether or not there should be a self-assessment in that as part of that. And of course, I've always been interested in trustees meeting amongst themselves. And it does say somewhere, although I don't think it's in the act, that we should have a self-assessment, a meeting once a year. But I guess what I need to find out if there's any interest other than mine in having a self-assessment, either A, as part of the director's preview, I'm sorry, the DPR, or having regular self-assessment meetings. I know it's two separate things, so is there any interest in having regular self-assessment meetings at least annually?
I'll open it up to other trustees, Trustee Crawford, to see what people are thinking or not. Any commentary, trustees? Donna Edwards.
Under the good governance guide, it actually does say that boards should do a self-assessment, regularly do a self-assessment. But this would be, I would say, a process that one of the first steps is actually determining whether your board is ready or it's the right time to start the self-assessment process and how you're going to do it. It's a huge discussion from that perspective. Yes, I think boards should do a self-assessment because it's good governance. However, are we as a board ready to do that considering timing, et cetera, the way things are right now, having a new, basically municipal elections coming up in October, whether it's appropriate to maybe do it, have that a consideration for the new board coming in. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Donna. Any other, Trustee Thatcher?
Thank you, Chair Barrett. Yes, I think Donna just makes some good points. And for sure, I had read it myself in the OPS Good Governance Guide. And I did actually have some conversation with Trustee Crawford about it because some of the boards do link it with the Director Performance Review. Unfortunately, in our terms of reference, we, at this point in time, that would not be included in there. So it would take, we would probably be required to go back and take a look at that. But as we're well into that process, I would suggest that that be something that we suggest when we do review our DPR policy and make some recommendations going forward. I think this could be something that could be included there, so that the next group, whenever that review is done the next time, could consider that recommendation.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher. Any other comments? If I could make a comment. I don't like to disagree with you, Trustee Thatcher, but this time I'm going to, if that's okay, because I don't think it has anything to do with the DPR. I think they are two separate. I know other boards have linked them together. You're absolutely correct. But for the life of me, I don't understand how they link trustee self-assessment and director assessment together. I think they're two separate items. I would, however, fully support the concept that you are, both Don and you and Paul are advancing. To quote other trustees on the board, this is my life. This is what I do for a living. I teach governance. I develop self-assessments. I have done this globally, and I think it's an important element to be able to have boards self-assess, understanding that self-assessments really consist of at least 4 items. One is the self-assessment as self, an assessment as a board, and then you have the assessment of the chair, and then you also have assessment of the committee chairs as well on how they're fulfilling their role. I think it's a very positive thing to be able to do. I will tell you that probably in the last term, it was probably the last thing I'd want to be able to do with the roller coaster, to be quite honest, that this board has experienced over the last 4 years. And I know Trustee Crawford and I've had some conversations about wanting to be able to get involved in that. But we did have a motion on the table about 2.5 years ago that we were going to use an outside source to help this board be able to have those discussions. We passed the motion, then it was never ever acted upon, which to me is which is very unfortunate, because 2.5 years ago probably would have been the right time to be able to start. But I agree both with Christine and Donna that that this is very important, but I would see it as a potential recommendation for the next board of trustees as part of a regular assessment, etc. So I'll leave it there, and then I'll go to Trustee Crawford and then back to Christine Thatcher.
You may go to Christine first.
Chair, I was looking.
Oh, I didn't realize you were having a supplement. I thought you had finished. I had already moved on to talk, so that wasn't the supplemental. You're asking for another.
You were just having such a good time disagreeing with everybody. That's the issue here. Yeah,
go ahead, Trustee.
I think definitely I'm open to some discussion. I believe Trustee Edwards made some good points, as I mentioned, and I'm certainly open to some discussion about where that might be. I think my comment was just that if you look at the Good Governance Guide, which both Trustee Edwards and myself refer to, it does mention that some boards have connected it with the DPR committee when the review of the director is done. And so, but we can certainly have further discussion about where that could be, because, and I know, Chair Barrett, how flexible you are. So I know for sure that would be a consideration for you as well.
You might be dreaming on that one, Trustee Thatcher, but that's okay. So I'm gonna go back to you now, Trustee Crawford. So,
Okay, I'm willing to close the conversation now, having introduced it. I would like us maybe during some of our in-camera meetings, if we did take some time for trustee discussions on just about any subject. I know it's not real self-assessment, but I'd be anxious to be able to have more conversations with the trustees. And I'm satisfied with that now. There's no motion or anything that you have to vote on. I'm pleased to have the discussion about it. And I wouldn't mind moving on to my other item if everybody's okay with that.
well, Trustee Crawford, I am chairing the meeting now, so just. to
Oh,
let
I'm
you know.
sorry. I
So,
just thought I'd practice in case
with-
I ever get the chance to chair.
Well, with all due respect, just want to make sure we respect the role of the chair. So just let me check to see if there's any other commentary on your item, Trustee Crawford. Not seeing any. So now as chair, I will suggest that we move on to the next item on our agenda, Trustee Crawford, which is the board member trustee code of conduct. I did, as I mentioned at the start of me, I'm not sure if you were on the call at that point. I did take your email, Trustee Crawford, and I did put it into the chat. So that way that everybody had as a reminder of what you had come forward with. So I have put that in there to facilitate that, but I'm going to turn it over to you, Trustee Crawford.
Yes, and I thought that was a good thing to do, and it sort of put it down into a size that everybody could understand, because I'm not looking to go through the code of conduct or the appendix on the IC. My concern is very limited, and I think we can keep it down to that, is that it appears now that anyone who wants to can file a complaint with the integrity commissioner, bypassing the board or any other process. Our original code of conduct was written, as most code of conducts are, with a process that tries to avoid problems, so that individually, if someone had a problem with something that a trustee had said or done during a meeting, they could, in order, call the person to order or ask the chair to call the person to order or object to what the person had said. I only say that because it's the most immediate way to begin to deal with a problem with something somebody has said. The other would be to ask the board, or I'm sorry, to approach the person and say, I was offended by what you had done or said, and for them to try to resolve it amongst themselves, which is the way most problems are solved. And the other would be to ask for assistance from the chair or to ask for assistance from the board. And the bottom line is that it would either be resolved amongst the people, or the board would take it as a complaint and the board would make inquiries and the board would make a decision as to whether or not there should be sanctions. That's sort of it in a nutshell. And that's the way I think things should be done. But the wording of especially the appendix part of the code does seem to indicate that an individual can take something to the IC and the board would not be involved with it until the IC brought forward a report. So therefore, we wouldn't be using the process of problem solving. We would be going directly to someone taking it to the IC, which in my opinion should be the last step. If I bring something to the board and the board doesn't resolve it properly, or I'm not happy with that, then I can go to an outside group the outside group, in this case being the IC. So the bottom line is, can we work on clarifying what our intent is and then clarifying the wording so that we wouldn't be running into this situation?
So Trustee Crawford, before I open it up, just a couple of clarification questions if I could. So trying to be able to understand where the concern is being generated from. Is the concern being generated? Okay, let me feed back to you and you tell me whether or not I'm correct or not. So what I'm hearing is that there's a concern that that there is language that you would suggest would encourage, let's say, trustees to be able to go directly to the IC. The second is that I hear what you're saying. What I think you're saying is that there's a concern with regards to like the potential costs of being able to go to the IC, and that three, you'd really like the opportunity to have this broader conversation amongst trustees to try and resolve problems before it goes forward. Is that kind of in a nutshell? Have I hit the point?
Yes, except that you might have misspoke. I think you said on your first sentence that to encourage it to go to the IC, where it's the opposite. I think we should be encouraged to resolve the problem, and that the last step would be for the person, the complainant, to go to the IC.
Yeah, what I was saying, Paul, was that the current policy encourages, in your mind, encourages people to go formal, and you're suggesting the opposite. So we are saying the same thing. I was just saying that it's your belief that the current policy encourages people to go to the IC, and you'd like it that it would encourage people to try and resolve it informally.
That's right. I'd like to encourage them. And I don't say that the present policy does that. That's a word that you're using, encourage. I'm saying that it allows it. It seems to allow it.
It does,
and,
certainly. It does. It doesn't seem to. It really does allow it. So yeah.
Okay. So you've done your reading, and I've read it so much now that I'm almost blurred. But it's a marvelous document if you can't sleep at night. So I'd like to get some feedback about just that's the main element right there as to the process and how it should be used and what is the best way to approach it.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to open it up for conversation. I see Dawn has got her hand up, and Patrick, don't, when you feel it's appropriate, don't feel that you have to keep quiet, but we'll let trustees, have an opportunity. So Dawn, I'm going to go to you.
Well, I mean, I kind of agree the way the policy is written, that there should be the option. However, when it comes to the complaint process, it basically also says that the informal complaint members can go an informal complaint process, and even having the IC. I think it's important that whoever is making a complaint has the ability to decide what process they feel and what comfortable they feel as far as a third party is concerned. So I don't think it encourages to go. Yes, it's an option, but I don't think it encourages somebody that they have to go to the IC. It does give you the options, and I think the options are valid. And it's really up to how we work with the IC, is that the IC basically is that third party, and they themselves can look at and say that you want to do this informally, and we can have the parties, have this discussion around what the issue is. So I really kind of like the way it is.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Going to see Patrick, if you could.
Thank you, Chair Barrett. So just, I'm happy just to provide a summary, I guess, of what's
what's in the bylaw now, so that it maybe help the committee identify any gaps. So currently, a member of the board has the right to come to the board itself. No obligation on a member of the board to go to the trustee. They're free to come to the board and to raise an alleged breach, and they're free, obviously, to try to resolve that through the board as a whole. They can also try to resolve it informally through the informal process that's laid out in the code, as any other complainant could. So they have those options. A member of the public has the informal options that's laid out in the protocol, and also has the option of going, as Trustee Crawford has correctly pointed out, a member of the public or staff or anybody, or a trustee, if they feel they can go directly to the IC. So I think those are, just to build on Trustee Edwards' comments about the options, those are essentially the options in terms of how one can proceed, depending. It's only members of the board who can go directly to the board, but a member of the public could alert a member of the board who could then go to board, but they cannot bring a matter directly to the board.
Thank you for that clarification, Patrick. Trustee Morton?
Thank you, and through you, Chair Barrett. I just want to say that I appreciate the options that we have. I think that we need to provide choices, whether it's formal, whether it's informal, whether you're going through the board or whether you're going through the IC. I think that we need to provide choice, and we are doing that.
Okay, so just clarifying then, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Trustee Morton. So you're not necessarily looking to change any of the current code, is that okay? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just trying to get an understanding of where we're going as well. So
That's correct.
okay, I'm going to go to Trustee Forbes.
Thank you, Chair Barrett. So I agree that choice is really necessary. We shouldn't be trying to dictate one specific route to complaints. We've given options. It's clearly printed. We just passed the amendment in March, so we've already kind of very recently spoken to this as a board, and I like the way it's laid out as well. So that's my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Forbes. I'm going to go to Trustee Templeton because you haven't talked on the subject yet. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, thank you very much, Trustee Barrett. See if I can get loud enough, my dogs don't start attacking each other again. I believe in transparency, and the way the policy is written right now, it's quite transparent that it allows a freedom of whomever to go whichever route they really want to. So I don't see a need to change anything in the policy at this time.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I'm going to go back to you, Trustee Crawford.
Okay, I'm not talking about the choices. I'm talking about the way that they're placed, so that someone going to an outside party as the IC should not be the first thing to do. And at this time, that's what people could do. Just given a hypothetical situation, it could be that if someone was displeased with what someone had said during a meeting, they could take that directly to the IC. Now, when it's at the IC, the board is not aware of it. In fact, the board is not aware of how many items might be at the IC today, how long they've been there, what they're about, what the costs might be. And it could be weeks before something is settled. In the meantime, you have someone who has a complaint and you have someone who has been, in effect, charged, and still no board input and no nothing of the informal type and nothing of the constructive type has taken place. Suddenly a person finds himself with a letter from the IC saying that there's been an allegation, etc., and away it goes. So it doesn't lend itself to transparency at all, because the board is the main item that should be looking after these. And if you took the wording of the actual act, that's what it says. And of course, we're the ones that have to make the final decision after the IC is finished doing weeks of investigation. And one of the things that I did point out is that if people were to do some research, you just need to go to the Toronto District School Board, and they publish some IC information on there and an actual case, and you do some reading. ICs are not perfect. And in fact, I believe they have a conflict of interest in that them taking that investigation over is what they're going to be paid to do. Whereas if persons were encouraged, or we insisted on a process that took the other things into consideration, there'd be a good opportunity that the IC would never be involved. And by the way, that doesn't preclude people from including the IC in informal and in discussions. So the way that it is now is something that I could never agree with, simply because if I feel that the IC is being used and there's money being spent on us that's coming from the taxpayer and not going to the students, then I am actually in conflict with the Education Act that tells us that that's what we must do. You might think that's a funny way to think about it, but that's an actual fact. Now, I did notice in my research that it does say that an individual can get in touch with the IC and say, what about this? Would it be something that you think should come to you? Well, I'm not so sure that that step should be there. I think it would be best if people dealt with it the way it was originally planned to be dealt with in our original code of conduct. Those are my thoughts. I can only do what I need to do, but I would definitely like the board to look at the wording and maybe find some wording that wouldn't take away any choices, just put them in an order that they should be in, as any code of conduct would. And I'd like to point out that we're going to be dealing with a form of a code of conduct coming up on the harassment and safety. And the authors of that, which is one of them being Patrick, I believe, has taken the approach that things should be settled as close to home as possible without involving outsiders, and possibly done between the people that are having the problem. To me, this just seems to be common sense. I don't understand this love affair with an outside group as an IC is, when we have 11 pretty smart people right here to deal with it. And I can see I'm not going to change your mind, and maybe I'll just have to deal with this in my own way, but I'm always happy to have a conversation about it.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
That's all right. I was trying to cut myself off.
Okay, Trustee Forbes.
Sorry, I didn't know if Councillor Cotter had something to say. He turned his camera. Okay, you're good. Okay. Yeah, so I think that we've most of us have expressed that we're okay with the wording. We did just pass the amendment. I certainly hear you, but I also think that people will go through those options and then choose the ones that are best suit themselves and their comfort level. So I don't see a need to change it at that time. I've said that before, but I do appreciate having a conversation. Trustee Crawford, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Trustee Edwards and then Patrick.
I was just going to say, I do understand Trustee Crawford's concerns, especially when it comes to around costs, etc. And the processes are, any process is not infallible, and that because we have humans involved. And I just want to give an example is that, I have sat on another board where a complaint was brought to the board, but the individuals did not have the experience to that, and my complaint was fairly serious, that's all I'll say. Went against any good governance, and basically it was totally ignored, and to the point where other things happened. And I'll just say I left the board. So, it's because it's people that are involved in their interpretation and their experience and governance and so forth. And not everybody is as experienced as Trustee Barrett is, or Chair Barrett is, with his other, he actually, as I said, teaches governance and so forth. Not everybody has that experience. So it's really important to have that third party available. And that's where I see the choice is really important. Somehow, though, when we talk about accountability, we do have to ensure as a board that we do have to make sure that if there is so many issues happening, and we review the processes and what's happening with the annual report, and looking at what can we do to better ensure that we have good governance happening, and that these issues are not constantly coming forward. So it's part of that self-assessment as well, I would say. So it is something that we do have to watch, but I wouldn't want to change right now. We just changed it.
Thank you. Patrick.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Barrett. I feel I would be remiss if I didn't at least provide a brief comment on the assertion that having an integrity commissioner is in breach of the Education Act. So I think, that's not consistent with what we've seen from the ministry reviews of appeal, which expressly dealt with the role of the integrity commissioner there. And we have the report from the Ombudsman confirming that the Ombudsman has recommended integrity commissioners to several boards in dealing with code of conduct complaints, and the appropriateness of having an independent party investigate the conduct of peers around the table, and has recommended that it be enshrined into the Education Act as well.
Thank you, Patrick, for that. Trustee Crawford.
I can't help speak to you. I've had a
Go ahead,
double
Paul.
here. Can you hear me okay?
Now I can, yes.
Just to speak to that, I didn't say there was a breach of the Education Act. As we know, there hasn't been any regulations written about using an IC. And I know that that was recommended by others that we should be looking at it, but the government might be looking at, but they haven't put anything out to describe to us what the wording should be. And like I said, I wanted to keep it simple. My problem with it is that people can go directly to the IC, which is not necessarily productive. And Donna, you mentioned that you took something to the board and the board didn't handle it properly, but you took it to the board first and then you took it somewhere else. I'm not saying that the IC shouldn't be used. Certainly they should be, just as the ministry, the newspapers, a lawyer, there's all kinds of sources outside of the board that can be used if people aren't satisfied with what's taken place. This is simply a matter of putting things in the proper order so that things aren't going out to the IC that could be resolved by us. That's as simple as it is.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. I'm going to go back to Trustee Forbes.
Sorry, just one quick point, because actually Trustee Edwards reminded me, so Trustee Crawford had mentioned about costs, and we're all sensitive to costs, but that using an IC removes funds from the classroom. I thought these funds were, I just want to know where they come from in terms of where they're earmarked. We don't have a lot of latitude in terms of where funds are spent. The ministry is pretty clear on where they come from. So can anyone address that for me, please?
I'm going to go to Patrick.
I'm not sure if Associate Director Wright is here or not, but I'm happy to jump in. So that
He's not here, so
okay, I'll do my best.
You're my treasurer. You're my treasurer right now, Patrick.
Okay, so the funds for that come out of the admin and governance budget, our central budget. So that's allocated for those funds coming out of our admin and governance line.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Okay, I'll just make a couple comments, and then I think what we'll do is we'll kind of summarize. But I don't disagree, Trustee Crawford, with your vision and your intent, because I believe that that the board should be able to attempt to be able to resolve their issues and work at being able to solve their issues. It's just unfortunate that that has not been the case in this board, and my concern is that although I know you're not mandating it, that certainly anyone who files a complaint should have the choice to be able to determine where they want to be able to go. And and I wouldn't disagree with you, Trustee Crawford, that we don't want an IC to be utilized as a weapon or as a political weapon against trustees. And being able to have that as a methodology to be able to silence individuals, etc. So I have seen that happen in other boards. I've seen that occur, and that would be a travesty and a tragedy if ICs are used as that manner, in that manner. I would certainly, I'm a utopian idealist who would absolutely agree that if I had my druthers, I'd want us to all sit around a table, hold hands, toast marshmallows, and sing campfire songs in front of a campfire and be able to resolve all the issues. But I know that over the last while that may not be the case. And having been on the receiving end of stories in the media and allegations made by trustees of on this board to the media, etc. Trustee Crawford, I quite understand the role and the need. I'm not in favor. I agree with the other trustees. I'm not in favor of changing the methodology. I believe that choice. I would like, Trustee Crawford, to be able to have these issues resolved. You need a brave and strong chair in order to be able to do that. But then the chair, to be quite honest, sitting there, sometimes the chair isn't welcomed in being able to resolve issues, and people don't want the chair involved. And so therefore I can quite understand that sometimes the chair has no authority to be able to resolve this. It'd be nice if they could, but any chair, no matter who it is, has no authority to be able to resolve these, and sometimes is unwelcomed in that process, not looked to. So it's very difficult. But I myself would agree with the comments that are made that the policy, I think at this point, allows choice. I would hope people would look to an informal methodology but it would be up to the individuals to determine what process they want to be able to take. And I see Trustee Crawford, your hand's up, so.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't looking for a kumbaya type of solution. I'm only looking to the Education Act, which describes it the best, that if someone has reasons to feel that someone has not acted properly, they can take it to the board. And the board, of course, at DDSB is 11 people, not the chair, not one person, but 11 people. And that was the intent of the of 218 and the Act, is that boards resolve these issues amongst themselves. That was their intent. It might change when they write something to go along with the use of an IC. And you talked about it could be used. I can assure you it is being used. Just as we've had people come in front of the board and make accusations and actually name names, and just as we've had the union write letters about something that was said at a meeting and everybody knew who they were talking about, yes, this is being misused. And one of the ways of avoiding that is to ask people to go through a proper process. For instance, you can't go to the government and other bodies. If you go to them and say, I'm having trouble with the board, they're not doing what I want, the first thing they're going to ask is, have you been to the board? Have you put it in front of the board? And if you say, yes, you have, and the board hasn't reacted properly or is ignoring you, that's the time to take it to a third party. And if you take the time to read the materials, just if you've got 3 hours to go through the report written by the IC at the Toronto board, then you'll have a much greater understanding of what my concerns are.
And Paul, just to be quite honest, I mean, Paul, with all due respect, I mean, Paul, I have read that report. I've read the York board report. I've read the Peel board report. So I'm not sure if you think that you're the only one who's read the documents, but
I don't think I am, but I'm just, I don't mean to say it that way. I'm
okay. I was
deliberately
taking
saying it that way.
it that way. So
yeah, well,
so
go ahead and take it that way. But if you've read these documents, then you know that there's more to say against ICs and how they operate than there is for them.
well, I might disagree, but
That's okay to, it's okay to disagree.
Yeah,
That's what, in fact, well, one of my problems is that when we're debating something, especially when it has to do with human rights and we're having debate amongst themselves, ourselves, then people shouldn't from the outside and even on the inside saying, I don't like what you said during that debate, and therefore I'm going to take it to the IC and I'm going to put you through weeks of torment, not to mention cost. And the very bad part of it is that it comes back to us after they've done all that. Just the same as that lengthy report that was written for the Toronto School Board. It came back to them and then they refused it after all that work. That's how much went into it, and that's what it was worth. The bottom line is we're the ones responsible, we're the ones making the final decision, and we should be the ones saying in what order we should be looking after these things. That's as simple as the message is. And you're tired of me, and I might be tired.
Well, Jessica, I think we certainly allowed a lot of conversation as well.
And that was great. Thank you.
So I'm going to go to Trustee Thatcher, then I'm going to close the meeting. So.
Thank you, Chair Barrett. I was just going to maybe end on a positive note. I myself am just in the process of rereading the reports from the ministry for 2 school boards. And in the case of one of the school boards, the IC was in fact used as a weapon, which was vexatious and certainly discouraged and denounced by the ministry, because this is not the purpose of an integrity commissioner. But ultimately, the integrity commissioner was recommended and used to restore public confidence for that board, which I feel is very positive. The other thing for the other purpose of an IC is to support new trustees in terms of, being part of the onboarding process, to support new trustees and to help to guide them. So that's just a comment I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and to build on that and then to close, I mean, the reality is that it's not the IC that becomes the issue. It becomes the use of the IC by individuals on boards. The concept of an IC is not something that is unfamiliar to other organizations that use integrity commissioners in order to be able to at least have a third party or at least have some arbitration. The reality is that if it's not used correctly, we don't have far to look than the trustees themselves who potentially use it as a weapon. So I don't disagree with you, Trustee Thatcher. And if this government had been somewhat, I got to be careful now. Well, there was legislation on the table with regards to the trustee code of conduct, which also included the parameters of adopting the use of an IC as well. And I think that, depending on who forms the next government, that may be something that will come forward. The only thing that I would always say is that I would expect that trustees would be managed and governed in the same way that every elected official. We shouldn't have rules that only apply to trustees. But if I'm looking around the table, I'm not seeing a great deal of support for being able to change the element, to change the parameters. And so therefore, again, there can always be further conversation, but I'm not seeing any trustees lining up behind being able to suggest that we change this, with the exception of yourself, of course, Trustee Crawford. So I think, trustees, that will conclude our agenda for tonight, seeing no other business before us. So I will, now that we've completed the business as per the agenda, I will declare this meeting adjourned. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Good night,
everybody.
everyone.